Does breaking more barriers with Lloyd excite you?
Because no matter how high the barrier, it'll never be enough to stop us.
How about Muse always hitting on Rean?
Oh, how lovely. It's nice to be honeymooning in a winter wonderland. Instructor Rean's love and support give me the strength necessary to overcome any obstacle.
Oh my. Love, you say?
Can't you spare me your harassment in front of him?
How about going through air ducts and avoiding looking in a certain direction?
Such a bad boy, aren't you, Lloyd?
Wazzy, I'm trying very, very hard not to think about it right now.
What are you two? Good grief.
Or maybe you're having a little too much fun with the series like C is.
I simply did not expect this affair to take such an amusing turn. Never did I expect to have this much fun.
Or seeing the final conclusion of 2 arcs, Crossbell and Erebonia. Then Trails into Reverie is your game. This game is the big payoff all of us Trails fans have been waiting for after about 700 hours plus of playing all previous 9 games. Whew, it's a long time. But you know, it's worth it because we're finally at the end game, to end both the Crossbell and the Erebonian arcs. So with all that being said, the bare minimum in the playing Trails into Reverie is playing 6 games. And these games are the 2 Crossbell games, which is Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure, as well as the 4 Cold Steel games. And if you play those games, you'll have a pretty good understanding of Trails into Reverie. But if you want to fully understand the game, then you'll have to play the first 3 games of the series, and that will be the Sky series. Trails in the Sky FC, SC, and the 3rd. So I wasn't kidding when I said that it'll take about 700 plus hours to complete all 9 games. And in the unfortunate case that you haven't played the first 6 games, I do not recommend you playing Trails into Reverie as your first game into the Legend of Heroes franchise. Just don't do it. You'll be so confused as to what's going on. You won't know who any of the characters are, their significance, or their history. It just wouldn't be a fun time for newcomers. Trust me on this and start from Trails from Zero, at the very least. As expected, this video is going to have some minor spoilers, ranging from Trails from Zero all the way to Trails of Cold Steel 4. But there won't be any spoilers talking about Trails into Reverie. So with that being said, let's first talk about the story. The game picks up 5 months after Trails of Cold Steel 4, where the Great Twilight is over and the continent of Zemuria goes back to relative peace. The game follows 3 main story paths: Rean, Lloyd, and a new protagonist, C. Rean returns back to Erebonia, travels back to his hometown of Ymir with his students to see his parents, relax, and do some training to stay sharp. However, this trip would take a huge turn from a simple getaway, as his group would soon be given a secret mission. Switching to Lloyd's path, his adventure takes place in Crossbell and starts off with the action immediately. With the last of the Erebonian forces leaving the city, a few rebel soldiers tries to take control of Crossbell in their place. Lloyd and the SSS, though, wouldn't have any of that, as they would expel these rebels. After doing so, the city of Crossbell awaits that faithful day of Independence Day, where signing the official papers will make the bustling city independent once again. Then there's new protagonist C, who introduces a new cast to the series. His story starts off with 2 kids tasked to delivering a suitcase and being chased by a mysterious group. These kids soon run into C along the way, who decide to help each other out. They're investigating who's chasing them and what's going on behind the scenes. And this sets the stage for the 3 story arcs of Trails into Reverie. The game revisits many of the same places seen in Trails of Cold Steel 3 and 4, but with its scope a lot smaller, as Trails into Reverie visits just a handful of these locations. It's great to see some of these locales revisited, with one place in particular not seen since Cold Steel 2, now with updated graphics. The game also gives some characters some much needed attention, with Kurt in particular being one example. Kurt was just there in Cold Steel 3 and 4 and was outshined by the rest of New Class 7. In Trails into Reverie, however, he shines a lot more and gets some much needed character development. The game also wraps up many of the loose threads from the Crossbell and Cold Steel arcs. There's many characters that will make appearances, and it's a treat to see their growth over the course of 6 games. Even seeing some of the NPCs' journeys and where they're at now adds to the series' lore. And then looking back at the main cast of the original Class 7 and how they grew up as new, fresh students that were a bit standoffish towards one another in Cold Steel 1, to now grown-up adults having their own careers and having each other's backs in Trails into Reverie is just mind-blowing, as you can see the growth of each character through each Cold Steel. Throughout the story, players can switch between the 3 paths, called the Trails to Walk system, and play a path up to a certain point, where then they'll be locked out until you advance on the other paths. These paths, as players can predict, will intersect with one another, and it's great to see how these interactions play a part of the much bigger story. The triple path story mechanic is a big departure from the Erebonia and Crossbell arcs, which focused on a single protagonist and their group. The Trails to Walk system, with each having their own unique themes, with C's story being, in my opinion, the standout among the 3 stories. And speaking of C's path, to me, C has the best story path out of the 3, between the new protagonist, the new group, and the group's theme, which is vastly different from both Rean and Lloyd. C's path was a blast to play, and to see how well the character interactions are done in this group, we're going to check out this interaction, how Lapis rates the cuteness of each member's name.
Cute is important. If I were to rate the cuteness of everyone's names, Nadia gets 90 points. So I'm the golden standard of names, huh? Swin gets 65 points.
Am I supposed to be happy about that or not?
And C gets a 15. Your name just plain isn't cute. Hear that, S? Mask here got a 15.
I don't even get what her criteria is.
The characters in this route are just very entertaining, and I love the balance that this group has between the more serious side of C and Swin, as opposed to the more fun vibes that Nadia and Lapis bring. Those 2 sides play along so well throughout their journey, and you can compare C's group's chemistry to one of the SSS that's found in Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure. Now, one of the biggest strengths of C's route is it has a much smaller cast, so each character can shine and stand out without being overcrowded by a slew of other characters. And because of this, the character development in C's route, unsurprisingly, is quite high. We also have to talk about developer Falcom's big gamble, as they took a big swing with C's story, since it differs so much not just from Rean or Lloyd's themes, but any story theme Falcom has done up to this point in the Legend of Heroes franchise. Falcom's decision was quite unexpected. Fortunately, their big gamble paid off, as their decision was quite inspiring. The interactions between all the characters, 2 characters in particular, elevate the story so much. There's a reason why many fans of the game consider C's story not only the best in Trails into Reverie, but one of the strongest narratives Falcom has done in the entire series. One of the biggest strengths of this game has to be its pacing. Unlike the previous games, where there's a lot of fetch quests with little to no relevance to the story or world building, there's none of these quests and very few side quests, as well as no bonding events. The game is quite linear until being able to access the game's namesake, the true Reverie corridor. More on this later. The game also starts you off around level 100, so advanced character builds, skills, and large HP, EP, and CP pools can be used. So there's little need to grind, as players can jump right away into the main story. Since the game is quite linear, each storyline is shorter than in previous games, making the completion time of Trails into Reverie a bit shorter than the longer but more padded Cold Steel 3 and 4. I appreciated how this game has little downtime and that every event in the game feels impactful, like the story and characters are always moving towards a goal. But its shorter timeline for each story also made me wanting more, especially C's route, as this route has some of the most interesting plot points and one that's unique in the franchise. Now, the character bloat does come in this game, but a bit later. And character bloat, as you guys know, was a huge problem in Cold Steel 4, and unfortunately rears its head later in this game, Trails into Reverie. Fortunately, the overcrowded cast problem doesn't occur during the beginning of the game, where each path, especially C's route, has a party that's a lot more manageable in size. Yet, when the characters do start joining in waves, it really destroys that tight-knitness that smaller groups have. Now, the biggest feature in this game is the true Reverie corridor. First appearing in Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2, the corridor in this game is much larger. This corridor is a place where you can do a slew of extra activities. You can play mini games, watch characters' backstories, and customize party equipment. You can do these trial battles, which are reminiscent to Cold Steel 2 and 4, where there's certain party members that can do battles. You can open some sealing stones for items that's similar to gacha games, except that in this game, you don't have to pay real money, as well as provide this massively random generated dungeon to grind and gain new levels and gear. The dungeon has so many rewards and loot that it becomes quite addicting to delve deeper. And then they do have missions to complete, which does function as the game's job board. The Reverie corridor is where players will spend a majority of their time outside of the main story. Playing New Game Plus also opens up its dungeon to deeper levels, where there's tougher enemies and better gear. There's a lengthy side story attached to the corridor, where the party has to delve deeper to uncover its mysteries, and where they'll learn even more about the characters. Spending time in this New Game Plus side story in the true Reverie corridor adds a lot more playtime after the main story is complete. The true Reverie corridor also allows players to mix and match the 51 playable characters and place them in their favorite dream teams, as well as provide a good breather from the main story. Outside of leveling up in the Reverie dungeons, there's a lot of mini games to play, with perhaps the most popular one among fans being Vantage Masters. But there's a lot of other minigames, such as Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where you get quizzed by Beryl on Legend of Heroes lore. The Pom Pom game from Trails to Azure and Cold Steel 4 is back. Then you got this banana boat game, where you can invite a girl and collect as many flags as possible without falling off the boat.
Don't go too crazy.
You got this watermelon splitting game, and you can split, well, watermelons together. You can flirt with the ladies with drinks, which makes this a date.
Sorry for dragging you into this, Rean. I hope it's just my mind playing tricks on me, but you're not looking where you aren't supposed to be looking, are you?
And there's this mech game called Tierfing, which has some of the clunkiest controls that it should be a crime against humanity. And then you got the real minigame, Magical Girl Elisa.
Magical Girl Elisa, LS!
Where the plot is Rean being this evil prince or something, and the starting magical girls of Yuna, Muse, and Elisa being the power girls to save the world.
Brave forth! I'm Magical Yuna!
And there's even this episodic format where after you beat a stage, the game makes you look forward to the next stage.
Next time on Magical Girl Elisa, Stall Ritter's Strike!
You won't want to miss this.
I was even surprised with a lot of these mini games, there's a decent amount of voice acting. And color me shocked, but there's some actual story with these games. If players completed all these mini games, I can see the playtime expanding by an extra 20 to 30 hours. There's a lot of backstory that players won't see in the main story. So it's great that these backstories are provided as extras, as cramming all of them into the main story would kill its pacing. These stories are quite long, but it's well worth it to understand the characters and see where they were just before Trails into Reverie starts. For instance, to fully understand two of the new characters in C's route, Nadia and Swen, it's best to read the 3 and 9 novel, where it details the pair's sad past, how they came to be, and their current situation in Trails into Reverie. The novel is provided within Trails into Reverie's main menu. For the other backstories, they're found in the true Reverie corridor, where every time you crack open a blue sealing stone, you'll unlock a new story to watch. And these stories aren't some tacked on 2-minute add-ons either. A lot of these stories can take up to 30 minutes or more to complete, and there's also some gameplay, such as getting into combat within these mini stories, as well as, again, a surprising amount of voice acting within these backstories. There's a lot of intriguing side stories too, such as how Nadia and Swin know Risha and why they're friendly with one another, or behind the scenes with the SSS and their work routine, or the story between Olivier and Shara's wedding day, and how a certain thief B stole Shara's wedding dress a day before the big wedding. So we got Nightmare, which was the previous bear holder for insanely hard difficulty in the Legend of Heroes games. But now we got Abyss, and whew, doing Abyss hurt my head. It's quite tough. If your idea of having fun is going against enemies that are 50 to 100 levels higher than you, then Abyss will be your jam. Because in Abyss difficulty, it's really going to test you how well you know the game. How well can you manipulate turn orders? How well can you break game mechanics? And how best to build your character when the enemies are so much higher level than you. Just to put this in perspective, when you start the game at level 100 and enemies start at level 200, they're going to be 4 to 5 times faster on average than your fastest party member. And there's times where the enemy will just wipe you out without you ever taking a single turn. That's why speed on Abyss mode is especially important. You need to have at least 1, if not 2 turns to act before the enemies just lap around you with their superior speed. And don't even get me started on the boss battles, which, oh man, with their tanky HP and their speed, of course, and how you can get one-shotted even with Wraith orders that reduce damage up to 50 or 60%. This difficulty is insane, but you feel so rewarded when you beat a boss. It's that hard and that satisfying.
Now, for the voice acting, it's quite solid, which I expected coming into this game. From the voice acting list that NIS America published back in December 2022, showcasing all the VAs working on the game. But what I didn't expect was the amount of voiced lines, with many sections that I wasn't expecting to get the voice acting treatment, having tons of it in spades, which in previous Cold Steel games, this would not be the case, as in those games, there would be scenes where voiced characters would talk to a mute Rean. This happens a lot less in this game. If Trails into Reverie has this much English voice acting, this bodes well for Kuro no Kiseki when it comes out to the West. Here's my other musings on this game. You might have noticed that this review doesn't touch on combat, and that's because it's largely unchanged if you played Trails of Cold Steel 3 and beyond, with the only big change being this new attack called United Front, also called Valiant Rage in Japanese. This attack is a 5-person or more tag team on enemies, where you can choose to do massive physical or magical damage or fully recover. It's quite a powerful mechanic, with it being able to one-shot normal enemies or do a ton of burst damage to bosses. And some might even say it's quite broken. And speaking of broken, I do think that one good change is that the game tones down the brokenness quite a bit when it comes to equipment and quartz. Sure, you can still make your characters insanely powerful, but in Trails into Reverie, you'll have to work for it. The game just won't hand out crazy bonuses and ornaments and accessories no longer. One example is the well-known evasion tank build, where you can get a character to 100% or more in evasion, so they can't get hit with physical attacks and dish out powerful counterattacks in turn. In this game, getting to 60% evasion is now quite difficult, as some items had their evasion bonuses nerfed, or in the case of the popular accessory, Evergreen, that too got nerfed, as players will have to go a step further and get a new item called Pure Evergreen to get enhanced evasion bonuses. Players are going to have to grind a lot more for the super rare items and get creative to hit that sweet 100% evasion stat. As with Cold Steel 3 and 4, Trails into Reverie makes you form teams at certain points of the game once character bloat comes into play. I always like this aspect of the series, where you just can't use the same 4 people in your starting lineup for the entire game. It makes players develop most of the cast, since you never know when the story makes you split up your party. So it's always good to have your Team A, which will have your best 8 characters, including reserves, a Team B, and a Team C. The game also allows players to import their save data from Cold Steel 4 to get bonding points and who they picked to romance. In my save, I picked Emma, and because of that, there are a few dialogue changes in the game that reflect that. The new Kuro no Kiseki engine can be seen during the ending, which I can't show here because of spoilers, but the graphics in this engine looks quite nice and just shows how much developer, Falcom, leveled up their graphics since Cold Steel 1 and 2. I'm glad Falcom made this epilogue, as this game acts as Cold Steel 5 and Crossbell 3, as well as a bridge to Kuro no Kiseki. The game has fan service in spades, where there are certain cutscenes in the game where it's definitely fan servicey, as some characters will do something amazing or unexpected, or past characters will show up as guest characters in the true Reverie corridor, or the game will try to cram as many characters in the main story for the players to play, which unfortunately adds to that character bloat we were talking about earlier. The game gives closure to many plot points and loose threads, while being a good, enjoyable game. I liked how this game showed where old and new Class 7 will be going, and where the SSS and Crossbell will be headed, as well as wrapping up some NPC stories as well. And of course, the addition of C and that story's cast of characters are great additions to the franchise. Trails into Reverie does a great job in wrapping up many of the character stories and nicely sets up for the Calvard arc.
Trails into Reverie is a great send-off to both the Erebonia and Crossbell arcs. I'm gonna miss these two arcs as all of us Legend of Heroes players grown up with Trails from Zero all the way to Trails from Cold Steel 4 for the last 6 games. And that's about a decade of gaming just crammed in to those 6 games. I'm gonna miss Rean and Lloyd and new and old Class 7 and the SSS and Crossbell. So I'm glad that Trails into Reverie had this payoff that was well worth it. So with that being said, it's time for the next game in the series, Kuro no Kiseki. I don't know when it's gonna come out, but judging from NIS America's recent release dates, I'm thinking we'll probably get it next year. Just in 2023 alone, there was Trails to Azure that got released, Trails into Reverie, and the upcoming Nayuta title coming out. I think that developer Falcom, as well as publisher NIS America, know that there's a lot of Western and international fans that love this series. And with that, would be highly encouraged to bring your games from Japan to the West. So I can't wait to see which characters from Trails into Reverie make the jump into the Calvard arc with Kuro no Kiseki, as well as Falcom finally moving on from the Fire engine, which is used in all 4 Cold Steel games. So let the wait begin, because I'm ready to experience the Calvard arc.